In 1953, a group of British and American officials sat in a series of closed meetings and made a decision that would determine the fate of an entire nation for the next 70 years. They were not elected by the people whose country they were deciding the future of. They were not authorized by any international body to make this decision. They represented two governments acting in their own strategic and commercial interest. And the operation they planned, codenamed Operation Ajax by the Americans and Operation Boot by the British, removed a democratically elected prime minister from power in less than a week. His name was Mohammad Mosaddegh. He was the prime minister of Iran. He had been elected through a democratic process that Western governments had praised when it produced outcomes favorable to them. His crime in the eyes of London and Washington was nationalizing Iran's oil industry, taking control of a resource that had been extracted from Iranian soil and sold by a British company for decades, while ordinary Iranians saw almost none of the profit. The coup that removed him succeeded. The CIA later declassified documents acknowledging direct American involvement in planning and executing it. The Shah of Iran, who had briefly fled the country during the crisis, was restored to the throne with American and British backing and ruled as an increasingly authoritarian monarch for the next 26 years. And in 1979, that monarchy collapsed in a revolution that installed the Islamic Republic that governs Iran today, a government whose foundational hostility toward the United States and Britain is rooted directly and explicitly in the memory of what happened in 1953. Every confrontation between Iran and the West since 1979, the hostage crisis, the nuclear standoff, the proxy conflicts across the Middle East, traces back through an unbroken chain of cause and effect to a decision made in closed rooms by men who believed they were protecting strategic oil interests and who could not have imagined, or perhaps did not care, what they were setting in motion for the following 7 decades. This is the story of how a coup against one democratically elected leader produced one of the most consequential and enduring geopolitical confrontations of the modern era. To understand why Mosaddegh became a target, you need to understand what he had actually done. In 1951, the Iranian parliament, with Mossadegh's strong backing, voted to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. This company, which would later become British Petroleum, had controlled Iranian oil production since 1913 under terms that were extraordinarily favorable to Britain and extraordinarily unfavorable to Iran. Iran received a small percentage of the profits generated from its own oil resources. The British government itself held a majority stake in the company. British tax revenue from the company's profits in some years exceeded the total payments made to the Iranian government. This was not a hidden arrangement. It was a well-known feature of the global oil economy in the early 20th century, replicated across multiple oil-producing nations under colonial or quasi-colonial arrangements. Mossadegh's nationalization was popular in Iran precisely because it directly addressed this imbalance. He proposed that Iran should control its own resources and receive the profits generated from them rather than a fraction determined by a foreign company. The British government's response was immediate and severe. They organized an international boycott of Iranian oil. They froze Iranian assets. They brought the dispute to the International Court of Justice and lost. They attempted to organize a Western consensus against Mossadegh's government. None of these measures succeeded in reversing the nationalization. By 1953, the British government had concluded that economic and diplomatic pressure would not work. They needed direct intervention. The British intelligence service MI6 had already begun developing plans for a coup, but Britain could not execute this operation alone. The British ambassador had been expelled from Iran in 1952 after Mossadegh accused British diplomats of organizing subversive activities against his government, an accusation that was substantially accurate. Without diplomatic presence on the ground, Britain needed American partnership to execute an operation of this scale. The Americans were initially reluctant. The Truman administration had been cautious about direct intervention, partly out of genuine democratic principle and partly out of concern about the precedent it would set. But the political calculation in Washington changed significantly with the election of Dwight Eisenhower in late 1952. The new administration, with John Foster Dulles as Secretary of State and his brother Allen Dulles as CIA Director, was significantly more receptive to the British argument, and the argument that British intelligence presented to American counterparts was carefully calibrated for an American audience increasingly preoccupied with Cold War anxieties. The British did not primarily argue that Mossadegh's nationalization threatened British commercial interests, even though that was the actual underlying motivation. They argued that Mossadegh's government was unstable and increasingly dependent on support from Iran's Communist Party, the Tudeh Party, and that continued instability risked Iran falling into the Soviet sphere of influence. This was, at best, a significant exaggeration. Mossadegh was not a communist. He was a secular nationalist with no documented affiliation to Soviet-aligned movements. The Tudeh Party did exist and did have some influence in Iranian politics, but characterizing Mossadegh's government as being at meaningful risk of communist takeover required interpreting Iranian domestic politics through a Cold War framework that significantly distorted the actual situation on the ground. But this framing worked. In the political environment of Washington in 1953, in the immediate aftermath of the Korean War, and at the height of McCarthyist anxiety about communist infiltration, the argument that inaction in Iran risked a Soviet-aligned outcome was sufficient to secure American participation in the coup. The CIA assigned Kermit Roosevelt Jr., grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt, to lead the operational planning for Operation Ajax. Roosevelt traveled to Iran under a false identity and began coordinating with British intelligence assets already operating in the country, and with Iranian political and military figures who were opposed to Mossadegh for various reasons, some genuinely ideological and some financially incentivized through CIA funding. The operation involved a coordinated campaign that included bribing newspaper editors to publish anti-Mossadegh propaganda, funding street protests and counter-protests designed to create the appearance of widespread public opposition to the government, recruiting military officers willing to participate in a coup, and orchestrating a sequence of events designed to provoke a constitutional crisis that would provide legal cover for Mossadegh's removal. The first attempt in mid-August 1953 failed. The Shah, who had been persuaded by American and British intelligence officials to issue a decree dismissing Mossadegh, lost his nerve when the plan began to unravel and fled to Italy. For several days it appeared that the coup had failed completely, and that Mossadegh's government had survived the attempt to remove it. Kermit Roosevelt, against explicit instructions from CYA headquarters to abandon the operation, made the decision to continue. He coordinated a renewed effort that combined paid street demonstrations with military action. On August 19, 1953, pro-Shah crowds, many of them paid demonstrators organized through CYA channels, moved through Tehran alongside military units loyal to the Shah. Mossadegh's home was attacked. He was arrested. The coup succeeded within a matter of hours. The Shah returned from Italy. Mossadegh was tried for treason, convicted, and sentenced to 3 years in solitary confinement, followed by house arrest for the remainder of his life. He died under house arrest in 1967, having never returned to active political life. The Anglo-Iranian oil company's position was restored through a new consortium arrangement that gave American oil companies a significant stake in Iranian oil production for the first time, which had been one of the underlying strategic interests motivating American participation in the operation beyond the stated concerns about communist influence. The Shah, now ruling with direct American and British backing and increasingly dependent on that backing for his own political survival, governed Iran for the next 26 years with growing authoritarianism. His secret police, SAVAK, developed a reputation for systematic human rights abuses, including torture and extrajudicial killing of political dissidents. American support for the Shah continued largely uninterrupted despite extensive documentation of these abuses, because Iran's strategic position as a Cold War ally and oil producer was considered to outweigh human rights concerns in the calculations of successive American administrations. This is the relationship that defined Iran's position in the world for the following quarter century. A monarchy maintained in power substantially through foreign backing, ruling over a population that increasingly associated that foreign backing with the loss of their own democratic government and with the human rights abuses of the regime it had installed. The CIA's role in the 1953 coup remained officially unacknowledged by the American government for over 4 decades. Internal CIA historical reviews documenting the agency's role in the operation were written in the 1970s but remained classified. It was not until 2000, when a CIA internal history of the operation was leaked to the New York Times, that detailed documentation of direct American planning and execution of the coup became part of the public record. In 2013, on the 60th anniversary of the operation, the CIA itself published a formal acknowledgement, declassifying additional documents that confirmed the agency's central role role in both the planning and execution of Mossaddegh's removal. This official acknowledgement came 60 years after the events it described. For 6 decades, the American government had allowed its own citizens and the Iranian public to understand the events of 1953 without official confirmation of direct American involvement, even as that involvement had been widely understood and discussed by historians, journalists, and Iranian political figures throughout that entire period. The 1979 Iranian Revolution, which overthrew the Shah and installed the Islamic Republic, was not caused by the 1953 coup in any simple direct sense. 26 years separated the two events, and the revolution emerged from a complex combination of factors including the Shah's authoritarianism, rapid and unevenly distributed modernization, religious and cultural backlash against perceived Western cultural influence, and specific organizing efforts by religious and secular opposition movements. But the memory of 1953 was not incidental to the revolution. It was foundational to how the revolutionary movement, and particularly its eventual leader Ayatollah Khomeini, framed the relationship between Iran and the West. The narrative that the Shah was fundamentally a foreign imposed ruler, installed and maintained by American and British power against the will of the Iranian people, was not revolutionary propaganda divorced from historical reality. It was a substantially accurate description of how the Shah had returned to and maintained power after 1953. This narrative gave the 1979 revolution a specific character that distinguished it from many other anti-authoritarian movements of the 20th century. It was not simply a revolution against domestic tyranny. It was explicitly framed and substantially experienced by its participants as a revolution against foreign domination, with the domestic tyrant understood as an instrument of that foreign domination rather than as an independent actor. This framing has shaped Iranian political identity and Iranian foreign policy ever since. The hostility toward the United States that has defined Iranian foreign policy since 1979 is not simply ideological abstraction. It is rooted in a specific historical memory held with particular intensity by the generation that experienced or was raised in the immediate aftermath of the revolution, of a democratically elected government overthrown by foreign intelligence services acting in service of foreign commercial and strategic interests. Every subsequent confrontation, the 1979 hostage crisis at the American embassy in Tehran, the decades-long absence of formal diplomatic relations between the two countries, the ongoing dispute over Iran's nuclear program, the proxy conflicts fought across Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen exist within a historical framework where the founding trauma of the modern Iran-United States relationship is not contested or ambiguous. It happened. It has been officially acknowledged by the CIA itself, and it established a pattern of expectation on the Iranian side that has shaped 6 decades of subsequent interaction. Here is what is documented and certain. A democratically elected Iranian government nationalized its own oil industry in 1951. The British government, having lost an extraordinarily profitable arrangement, organized international pressure and ultimately a coup attempt to reverse this. The American government, persuaded primarily by Cold War framing of the situation rather than by accurate assessment of Iranian domestic politics, joined the operation. The coup succeeded in August 1953. The Shah was restored and ruled with American and British backing for 26 years, developing an increasingly authoritarian government with a documented record of human rights abuses. The 1979 revolution that overthrew the Shah was substantially shaped by the historical memory of 1953. The hostility that has defined Iran-United States relations since 1979 is rooted in this specific historical sequence, officially acknowledged by the CIA itself in 2013. Here is what remains contested or unresolved: whether different American or British policy choices at any point in this sequence could have produced a substantially different outcome, whether the strategic and commercial interests that motivated the 1953 coup were appropriately weighed against the democratic principles that Western governments claim to represent, whether the consequences of 1953, the establishment of an Islamic Republic explicitly hostile to American interests, the decades of confrontation that followed, the current nuclear standoff represent a worse outcome for Western strategic interests than allowing Mossaddegh's government to continue, an outcome that can never be definitively tested, but that historians continue to debate. The closed rooms where Operation Ajax was planned no longer exist in any meaningful sense. The men who planned it are dead, but the consequences of what was decided in those rooms are not historical. They are current. They are active. They shape the relationship between Iran and the West today, in real time, in ongoing negotiations and confrontations that trace trace their origin directly back to a series of meetings in 1953 where men who were never elected by the Iranian people decided what kind of government Iran would have. If the decisions made in rooms you were never invited into, the ones that are still shaping the world you live in today, are what you came here for, subscribe. Because the next room we open contains documents that have only been partially released, and what they reveal connects to everything we have already shown you.